Hello there everyone, and welcome to this video where I am going to talk about how to instill good eating habits during childhood despite your husband, your in-laws, and your extended family. So I know this is a big struggle for a lot of moms because we try to do the best that we can for our kids, and the more that we learn about nutrition and how it affects their moods, behaviors, and just general well-being, happiness, and health, it can be really hard to just watch them eat foods that are not considered healthy, right? And so I absolutely understand what you might be going through with maybe not having a husband who supports your efforts, who maybe sabotages them, or is a really terrible example for your kids, right? This is really difficult, obviously, as a mother, because your job is to make the right choices and the best choices for your family. And, you might find that, you have some sort of semblance of control, and then you start to feel good and on top of everything. And then your kids go to grandma's and then they get fed all this food that you don't really want them to be fed, and nobody's listening to you, and people make light of it and maybe make fun of you behind your back, right? All these different things can happen. And here you are just trying to do the best that you can and to instill these great values into your kids so that they can have lifelong health. And it can be really, really frustrating. So since my kids were little, I did notice that every single time they would go to grandma's, they would come home on, like, say they'd go there for the weekend, they would come home, and then they would end up with a cold or a flu literally the next day, every single time. And it's really frustrating, right? Because everybody else looks like the good guys, the fun guys, and we get considered the ones that are harming the kids, right? Like depriving them of fun. And unfortunately, then still when the kids come back home, we have to deal with them having colds, flus, and things like that. So really annoying. But here's one of the good things about it is if you notice this happening, like as soon as they come home and they get sick immediately after eating a bunch of processed and foods that are processed and full of sugar, is that on the bright side of it is a child that is healthy will actually respond really quickly to that, because the being sick is actually an opportunity for your child's body to cleanse. So while it's really frustrating as a parent and it's not how you would choose to feed your kids, at least you can know that because they got sick immediately after, their immune system has the energy and they have the vitality to actually launch a response to all this stuff that was not good for them and clear it out of their body, right? That's essentially what the symptoms of colds and flus are, right? Like the body will launch a fever, you get the mucus, and the child will actually stop eating for a bit. It's like a forced fast, essentially, right? Sometimes diarrhea. So everything is clearing out of the body. It's really frustrating and annoying, but don't think of it as a sign that your children are unwell. It's actually a sign of good health when they respond really quickly with a cleansing response. So that's a good thing. Although it's frustrating, right? We don't want our children to have to go through that because they don't feel good after, right? It's like, it seems like it's fun to have a big binge, but then they're not really happy when they've got sore throats and they're tired and they don't feel well, right? So as much as we can, we want to have control, but at the same time, we really don't unless we stop them from going to grandma's or wherever. Or maybe their dads if you're divorced and your children spend time at an ex-partner's house where you actually have no control over what's happening. So what can we do? If we don't have control, we simply don't have control. Therefore, all of the emotional energy that goes into worrying about our kids doesn't help them, right? We actually have to see our children as healthy, regardless of how we feel about the choices that they're making, or some of the choices that people that are helping us take care of them are making. At the end of the day, it just doesn't help them, right? To see them as anything but perfectly healthy. So I understand how hard this is. Like, I remember when my kids were little, I spent a lot of time worrying about their health. Like every little thing that was not right, I would be concerned, like I was doing something wrong or missing something. So that I totally can understand how that can be troublesome. But I can now tell you from going through a lot of different phases with young children is that my kids have gone through what I think are just very natural phases, and it doesn't really mean anything about you as a mother or whether you've been successful. It's just like kids go through phases. So what I noticed is that my 3-year-olds love to eat everything and anything up to about that age. Basically, you'll think, and you'll hear this from a lot of new moms, like, oh, my child is an amazing eater, right? Up till about 3. And then they get picky, okay? And then sometimes you'll have one of the children, the older children not liking something, and then the younger children will just follow along with it. They'll just be like, well, I don't like that either. So that can always be, an issue of that older child influencing the younger children, okay? But I'm starting to notice, because now I have a 11-year-old and a 15-year-old, that eventually they come around, okay? They start to notice the connection between what they're eating and how they feel. And when they start to notice that connection, they will come back to the knowledge that you've provided them. So maybe they were in a state of resistance to it or rebellion to it because, they felt that you were trying to control them, or that, they saw other people eating differently and why couldn't they have that kind of fun, right? They may have experienced that, but then they also saw the good part of it, that they saw the benefit of how good they felt when they ate the natural whole foods that you provided for them. And that actually sticks with them. So I'm seeing that with my son, for example, who's 15 right now. And he is literally volunteered to take part in the hormone harmony cleanse that I'm running right now. So I have a 15-year-old boy who is doing the program. And the reason why is because he knows that the acne that he has now, this has been very chronic, which started at the time where he started to be old enough to make choices outside of our home on his own, right? So basically from the age of 11, he started to, just eat whatever, right? Like he could go to Safeway and buy something. So when he was 11 years old, he literally would go to Safeway with his friends after school. And I don't know if it was like their money or he had money from grandma or whatever. I have no idea. But he would go there and he would buy all these things from the bakery, and then he would hide them in his room. And, it was because it's something that I don't buy. So it's just not in our house. And, so there was a little phase there where I was like, oh my God, maybe I did the wrong thing, right? Maybe I instilled shame in my kids that they feel like they have to go and eat things in like secret or hiding. So you have to be really careful about how you speak about food. If I could do it all over again, so I'm talking to you as a mother with experience, having had, children now all the way up to Isaiah will be 16 in August. Just living, growing, you learn so much. If I could do it all over again, I would probably not spend so much time using terms about foods being good or bad. And I still struggle with it because it's like almost an impulse, right? Especially because I'm a nutrition teacher. It's always in my awareness about the impact of food. And I have strong opinions and I have a lot of experience. So it can be difficult for me not to say something when I see something that I feel could have a consequence. However, there may be better ways of speaking about food. So, but when my kids were little, I would use a lot of, that's bad for you, this is good food, that's bad food. And about a year or two, well, actually probably 3 years ago, I read a book called French Kids Will Eat Anything or Everything. And I was so inspired by that book. I highly recommend that you read it. And one of the amazing things that the French do is they don't ever talk about food being good or bad, yet they instill amazing habits in their children all through the culture that they create around food and the example that they have. So it's common for a French family to go get their food from the farmer's market. So the children get the connection between the fact that what real food is and where it comes from, and that the farmers grow it and then they go to the farmer's market and get it, right? They also have meals that last for hours and that have a lot of connection with family members. It's not like in North America where you just like shovel the food down, right? And it's just get it over with. Food is really important, and there's a huge connection to connecting with one another and sitting down to a meal, and it's also social, right? And then the schools provide food, and they provide whole foods for the children. So the culture at large, like the government, actually cares about the quality of food that goes into the children's meals and how it affects their learning behavior and everything as they go on through school. So as a North American mothers, we have quite a unique challenge because there isn't that culture or consciousness here. So it seems like everybody's trying to sabotage our efforts to give our children a nourishing experience around food. So it can be quite frustrating. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I've learned from experience, and hopefully give you a sense of peace around this, and just to recognize that you're not alone, and at the end of the day, you can only do the best that you can, and really just let go of the things that you don't have control over, because if you don't have control over them, and if you're not choosing to cut your children off from like family and those experiences, right? Because we all have choices that we can make, but we don't make them because we also see that the relationships also matter. And unfortunately, not everyone is as conscious as we are about food. So we just have to let go of the things that we don't have control over, right? It's like literally, working on our own inner fears around it, right? Because at the end of the day, it comes from a place of fear. It's worry. It's worry about our children's health. And most concerns that we have in life, basically the safety type and security type of fears, and these are very human-based, at the end of the day come down to the fear of death, right? I mean, let's just face it. That's what we fear. That would be our worst nightmare as mothers. So recognizing that we do not have control over how long we live, we don't have control on how long our children live. And this is one of the areas I think as mothers, sometimes we try to have control so that we can make sure that our children don't die, essentially. Like, let's just face the fears, and trust that, your child has the will to live. And your child wants to live even more than you want your child to live, okay? And remember, when you were a child, well, you're still alive right now, and you probably didn't eat nearly as good as your kids eat because your mother was probably not nearly as conscious as you are, and somehow you survived. So there is more to nourishment and more to living healthy than just eating perfectly. And we want to get rid of the stress around it as much as possible. So here's some of my ways of dealing with it. Okay, so the first thing is this idea of the 80-20 rule, where you focus on 80% of the foods you eat to be really good quality foods, and allow the 20% to just be for pleasure, okay? Not to be focused on the nutritional value of it or being fearful and avoiding toxins, right? Because if you look into like somebody's work, like Bruce Lipton, for example, the environment affects us, right? Nutritionally, and toxins do affect our cells, but also a part of that is how we feel about the foods that we're eating, right? And how we feel about what we're doing. So if you're having a terrible day and you're feeling really negative and you are stressed and you eat that food, it's not going to be as nourishing to you, okay? Well, whereas if you're, in Italy and you are on a holiday and you feel so relaxed and you're eating some food that's like, considered in the health circles not that great for you, like cheese and wheat and all that, and pasta. Wow, that food is going to feel totally different when you eat it because of the feeling of pleasure and joy that you're having traveling, and you'll probably digest that and get more nutrition from it just because of how you feel. So, trying to let go of the stress around food is a major part of being able to get the nourishment from it. So we want to actually focus on where we have control, not where we don't, right? Because if you'll notice, is if this is a big issue, the focus is constantly on where we don't have control, right? Like watching things happen that we don't agree with. So here's how I exercise the 80-20 rule. The way I feel is that you just bring into your home all foods that are healthy. And then if your kids go to grandma's, they go to their dad's, or they go, or you go out to a restaurant, that's the 20% that you can just let go and just let your kids choose what they want to eat so they can have the pleasure of it and not make it a big deal. Now, it's families where children are going to end up actually sick is when there is no 80-20 rule. It's just like a crapshoot all day of just eating whatever. Obviously, children cannot be fully nourished, and it's really important that they be fully nourished while they're growing, because they are literally growing organs and tissues, right? Like the child is in a development phase, and you want to build their body on the best quality nutrition as possible. So I think, what happens is a lot of families just have no idea about quality food, and they're just buying junk food. And those children, they have health problems. But your children, they're not. You don't have to worry about it. Just the fact that you're conscious of whole foods and you're following the 80-20 rule and, just creating a good culture around food, your kids are going to be okay. I'm sure of it. Okay. So the focus on where you have control versus where you don't. So if you are seeing that maybe it's becoming a little unbalanced, maybe your husband keeps on taking your kids to Tim Hortons like mine used to, or to Costco for hot dogs a couple times a week like he is now. Okay. I don't have control over that. Like literally, I don't. So, but what I do have control over is the meals that I cook my own children. So I'm not going to be taking them and out to restaurants very often, because I know they already are eating like that with their dad. So I'm cooking them home cooked meals, right? And just that, like every meal that I feed them is the most nutrient dense as possible. And I just do the best I can with that. And then I have to let it go. And I also, recognize that it's their body, right? Like to a certain age, children are very unconscious. Up till about age 7, they're in that subconscious world where, they are just picking up habits of their parents, and they don't really have any control over what they eat for the most part. It's what you provide, right? And then up to a certain age, they start to become aware of this idea of eating healthy foods and understanding that other foods are considered junk food and are not really eaten for nutrition, but they're eaten for pleasure. And, they can feel how foods feel in their body, and they have a choice about that, right? Like my son, he had a choice. He didn't have to go and buy those foods, but I think on some level he may have felt deprived because of the fact that we didn't have foods in our house that maybe other people had, right? So it's just like this, treat thing that he wanted to explore and splurge on. But even myself, I remember as a teenager having, sleepover parties with my friends, and we had something we called porking out, and we would literally buy as much junk food as possible. And I would always feel gross after. And I recognized that. Okay. But I wasn't raised in a super health conscious family. So I didn't know that there was a different way of living. But again, that is not our children's experience, because we are their mothers. They are always going to know how to eat healthy. If they start feeling too out of balance, they will come back to their roots, what they know. So I think you can just, on that level, just relax and know that all of the good things that you have done have also made an impression on them, and they will come back to it when they're ready to. Okay, and if you have a situation in which your family isn't supporting you and they are being exposed to a lot of foods that you don't recognize, don't feel comfortable with, to, just trust that, like, so for example, in my situation right now, being in the middle of a separation where up to this point, my husband never had resistance around eating healthy. And now the truth is coming out that he doesn't share my values, and he's loving to exercise his freedom in that area. So he's feeding my kids a lot of food that I don't really feel comfortable with. Okay, so that makes me kind of crazy to see that. However, I recognize that, there is more to, I believe, more to our reality than we understand. And I believe that we may actually choose our own parents. And that on some level, my kids knew that this was going to happen. And they still chose to have us as their parents. And at the end of the day, it's their body and it's their life. And if they want to rebel in that way, then what can I do? I can only do the best that I can in what I have control over. So allowing yourself to not take responsibility for something you don't have responsibility for. Like, it is not my responsibility to make choices about my kids' food when they are not in my care, right? I can't follow my daughter around on play dates and stop her from having the food that's at her friend's house. I can't stop her from having certain friends because I don't like the way they eat, right? So I just have to let that go. And I have let it go, and I just do the best that I can. And I think my children, like, as they're getting older, are starting to recognize how, how much work that I put into feeding them good food and starting to value it more. And they're past that picky eating phase where they feel I think they felt, what would be the word? I don't know. It was just kind of a disdain almost for food, right? Like, I don't know if you probably experienced this with your kids. You put food on the table and they go, oh, yuck, before they've tried it and stuff like that. I mean, that was really, really hard for me when they were going through that phase, because I spent a lot of time cooking. And then they would want to refuse it. But as I've seen, that I believe these are stages of their development. So I think it's important as mothers not to take it personally, seriously. And just remember that this too soon shall pass, and their tastes will change as they get older, and they'll be more open to food. So now I hear all the time, Mom, this is so good. Wow, that's amazing. What a relief. Okay. That time will come for you as well. And I think it will come sooner if you don't try to be forceful. I never made my kids eat foods they don't like. I made them try it. That is really important to me. That is definitely a rule. You can't say you don't like something if you haven't tried it, right? I would make jokes about, well, how can you taste with your eyes, Try to make light of it, right? And then making sure that you try to use empowering language around food rather than words that shame, right? Like saying foods are bad. And I believe that's why my son was taking food and hiding it, because I was using shameful words. And so he was feeling like he had to hide things. So, trying to say, this... we don't bring this food into our house because that's not for nourishment or something like that. That's just for fun or whatever, or pleasure or whatever. And then also trying to make sure that they understand that any food can be made in a healthy way, right? So you can also make foods for fun and for pleasure that are also healthy, and you can make that in your own home. And then they'll start to notice, like, oh, interesting. When I eat the chocolate bar from the store, I feel this way. When I eat the chocolate bar that Mom makes me without sugar and loaded with good quality fats and raw cacao, I feel good after eating it, right? And then let them make choices based on their experience, what their body tells them instinctually, rather than using their intellect. And the more they have experiences between the contrast of the two and how their body feels, then they're going to be more likely to be able to make conscious choices, because guess what? Our kids also want to feel healthy, right? So yes, making healthy versions of so-called unhealthy foods. Any food can be made healthy. If you have any questions about that, it's really about upgrading the quality of the ingredients of any food, right? So if you're unsure of how to do that, I would absolutely welcome you to just post something in the Facebook group about a food that you would love to make a healthy version of for your kids. And I'll give you, I'll find you a recipe, I'll even make you a recipe. Because I really do believe, I can't think of anything that wouldn't be possible to make healthy. I don't think there's anything actually that's a real food that's unhealthy, or anything that's like a fake food that couldn't be made with real wholesome ingredients to have. Maybe it's not going to taste exactly the same as the processed refined version, but it can be really, really delicious. And most of the time, I think it's better. And then, of course, we have to remember that children don't tend to like things that are super intense flavor-wise. So that's why a lot of times things that they think is delicious, we think is gross. Like, I remember loving Kraft Dinner when I was a kid, and then when I tried it as an adult, I was like, oh my God, like that tastes horrible. That has absolutely no flavor, but yet I really liked it when I was a kid. So I'm just going to now walk you through some ideas of things that you can do to help your children to eat well, and try to keep it really simple. Okay, so the parents decide what, and the children decide how much, right? It's like you can't feel inside their body when they're full, so they have to decide that, right? So you just put, make sure you stock your fridge and your cupboards with real whole foods, and make the meals, and then, make sure they try things, but they decide how much, because we don't want them to be overeating, because that's not great for their digestion, right? And you want them to slow down, chew their food and all that kind of stuff to get as much nutrition as possible. Teaching children how to prepare their own food as early as possible. So, within reason, and depending on how, what your personality is like. I personally sometimes have trouble with that because I just want to get things done. But I think it's better to actually include them in making food. And somehow, in all of this, my son is actually quite adept at making himself his own food at 15 years old, which is really cool. And my daughter hasn't really quite learned yet, but definitely she will. And as I embody this more, I would like her to come into the kitchen with me so I can teach her. But at the same time, I have to wait until she feels like she wants to, right? Because you don't want to force kids to do something, because then she'll end up having an aversion to cooking if I was to force her. But just being open to it. And of course, when they're really young, they're usually excited to do it because they just want to do anything that you're doing. Okay. Getting them involved in meal planning, like asking them, what do they want to eat? What are they in the mood for? Because then they're going to be excited, right? Or if you take them grocery shopping and you're picking different vegetables, let them pick some, because they're going to want to try them if they pick them. And also remembering that children tend to like raw vegetables better than cooked. So you can, include, make your food the way you want to make it, but you can put some raw food on the side of like every meal, like raw veggies for them to have as snacks, or, make veggie trays, things like that. Cultured vegetables. My children like cultured vegetables, but I introduce them quite early. Now, with Jasmine, I introduced it when she was still like a baby. So she has always liked cultured foods. Like when she was like 4 years old, she would ask for food, and she would say, I'm hungry. And I'd be like, do you want a bowl of sauerkraut? And she would say yes. Whereas my son, he was introduced a little bit later because I wasn't really familiar with that yet. And he would say no, and he didn't really like it. But now he loves it. So, sometimes it just takes a while, but I do recommend introducing the cultured foods and that sour flavor as early as possible with young children, because then they'll develop a taste for it. But if you wait too long, then you'll go through that phase where they want to not have it. Okay. You want to keep the meals simple and small, right? Smaller portions. if you overwhelm a child by putting too much on their plate, they automatically feel resistance to it, right? Because it's just too much. So, put just a little bit on their plate so they can get that done, and then they can ask for more. Okay. You don't want to bribe your children or reward them with dessert, okay? Because then they start to associate, well, that food, the dessert, is better than the meal. Or you start to have control issues around food. And some people, actually most people with problems, like health problems like anorexia or bulimia, part of the reason why they do that is because it's a control issue with food. So they feel in control. It's one area of their life where they feel in control. So you don't want to instill any control issues around food as much as possible. Okay. Because children will typically not eat a ton of food, you want to make sure that everything that you do provide for them is nutrient dense. So if you are providing snacks, make sure that they're nutrient dense. Okay. Kids tend to really like finger foods, things that they can just hold in their hand. So look for ideas that are basically, things they can just grab and eat without having to have a fork and a bowl and all that kind of stuff, if you can. And here's a really, I think, an important distinction that I've noticed is that some parents think that snacks or treats are snacks, okay? I think there's a big difference between a treat and a snack. My kids are not going to be given a treat in between meals, but they can be given snacks, okay? I also think when kids need to eat a lot of snacks, that there's something missing from their diet. There's something nutritional missing. So it's a sign. When your kid is hungry all the time and is never fulfilled, that they're nutritionally deficient in some area. It's usually protein or fat, okay? So to me, snacks are nutrient-dense foods that have protein and fat in them. It's not a muffin from Costco or a muffin from Starbucks. To me, that's a treat. And I think a lot of people make that confusion. And even it's not even a muffin I make. I still think of things like muffins and cookies. Those things, juice, that's a treat. That is definitely not a snack. So my idea of a snack would be things like fruit, cheese, yogurt, nuts, seeds, crackers, like olives, hard-boiled eggs, a veggie tray with a dip made with cream cheese, sour cream, creme fraiche, these nice, rich, fatty foods that satiate the children. They really need, their growing body really needs this nutrient-dense nutrition. They're not gonna get much nutrition from a muffin or a cookie. Okay. And then also recognizing that there's a lot of outside influences, right, that you don't have control over. They're watching YouTube, they're watching TV, and they're seeing commercials of certain foods that, marketers have marketed to them to convince them that that's exciting and that they should have it. So one of the things that there was a little phase that my daughter went through where she would come home saying that she was felt like she was hard done by because the other kids' food was more exciting and it all came in packages, right? And they had cookies and all sorts of things in their lunch. And she thought hers was weird. Her lunch was weird. And I thought it was strange because to me, it was just a simple lunch. It was like a sandwich, right? So then I started to provide things in her lunch so that it felt like a treat, right? Like some applesauce and a sea snack and a cheese, little strip of cheese that's in the plastic so that she had something to open, okay? Like obviously it's not environmentally sound, but I just wanted her to not feel like she was left out and not experiencing the fun that they were experiencing, right? So it was just like a little phase that she went through. She doesn't complain about it now, but probably if I asked her, she would probably have some input about what she would rather be eating, right? It's like at every, phase, we have, different things that we would like to eat. But right now, my kids are doing really well with food. And, it could change and we might go through some other, phase, but things are good now. Other than what my soon-to-be ex-husband is feeding them, I'm not like, it's not really even a big deal. There's just some things that he's just bringing in that just seem ridiculous to me, again, because it takes the context out of the 80-20 rule. Now it's like, 50-50, right? 50% good, wholesome, quality food, and 50% food that doesn't have nutritional value to it, right? Like, I mean, that's going to affect them. But like I said, I don't have any control over it, so they have to decide how they want to live their life, and they have to feel into how that feels in their body, and then they can choose to make better choices or not. So another major thing is to make sure that your kids have a nice nutrient-dense breakfast before they go to school. Okay, this sets them up to have a better experience at school, but they feel more grounded. Their brain is going to work better because they have all those good fats in their body and the protein that makes them feel grounded and calm. Okay. And also happy. Like, protein is essential for optimal production of neurotransmitters that make us feel good. So a lot of kids are struggling because they're basically just not getting the building blocks that they need. Okay, so ideally, a nutrient dense breakfast looks like maybe making some whole grain sourdough bread with a lot of butter on it. That, if you're just in a hurry, simple, it can be as simple as that. Chia cereals that you can make ahead of time or buy commercially. They're made of chia seeds and other nuts and seeds and a little bit of dried fruit, and then you can add hot water to it. Oh gosh, so an elastic moved beside me here, and it looked like some huge bug, and it freaked me out. Okay. You could put butter, not just butter on the sourdough bread, but you could put nut butter or seed butter, and that would be also some nutrient-dense grounding food. You always want to, when you have something like bread, because it is a carb, it's not as nutrient-dense, you put the butter on it, right? And that fat will make it more satiating and slow down the absorption of sugar. So that can be simple. With the chia cereals, you can add the hot water, and then you can add whipping cream to it. And then it's like a hot cereal, and it's instant and easy. And, depending on your child, they may or may not like them. My son likes them, but my daughter still kind of has an aversion to them. She's never really liked nut butters or the texture of stuff like that for some reason. But, I always like to get her to try it every once in a while again to see if she's ready for it, because as we age, our tastes change. So you always want to test it. Don't assume that because your kid didn't like something once that they're never going to like it again, right? Eggs, right? You can either just, scramble eggs. You can add cheese to them. You could add nutritional yeast for a cheesy flavor without cheese. Avocados are such great nutrient-dense whole foods. Just some nuts and seeds, or a smoothie, right? Just simple things, okay? How do you know that your kids, maybe you need to give a little bit more attention to the foods they're eating? So how you know your kids might be out of balance is that they have behavioral problems or learning issues, digestive struggles like pain, bloating, skin issues like rashes, fungal infections, things like warts and athlete's foot, stuff like that, or elimination problems, right? Like constipation or bloating, or maybe like acid reflux or something like that. Any of those problems, actually you do have to be more intense about the diet, right? You have to sometimes, moderation in moderation. A lot of people take moderation to an extreme. So when you see these problems, you do have to take control and, do a little bit of, a special time set aside where you focus on bringing them back into balance, and, you don't follow the 80-20 rule at that point, because you're dealing with a health condition and you need to heal it. So then you have to get your family on board. How do you do that? If your family won't get on board, then you're going to have to say, like, you can't go to grandma's, until this is handled, till these symptoms go away. Or you can't go to a friend's house until these symptoms go away. That can be motivating to stick with, a program to get healed. And, sometimes some really great supplementation that you can add on the side. See your local nutritionist or naturopath and look for some extra support so you can get results quicker and not have to be as extreme with your diet. But obviously you can't let those things go out of hand, right? And you may have to work a little bit harder to explain the connection between the symptoms and diet when you're dealing with a partner who's unconscious about how food affects health, right? Like sometimes, especially with men, they tend to minimize their symptoms and they're not as body conscious and they don't make connections between what they're eating and how they feel. So sometimes you have to provide, have more conversations and more research and more explanations and, maybe stories of people healing themselves to get your partner on board. And if you can't, honestly, like I would just take, go out to a trip, go on a couple weeks of a trip, go to a cabin or something like that and just, implement the diet. Or, honestly, I think it's a relationship issue, right? Like if you can't get your partner on board with you, if your partner doesn't value your knowledge and your experience as a mother and the fact that you're the one doing all the research and the one that's caring enough to do all that research and spend all that time and is willing to make that food, and they're not acknowledging that you have that knowledge and not supporting you and supporting your kids to get healthy and not have to go on like medications for these things, then I really think there's a relationship issue going on there, a lack of respect, and I would be like marriage counseling would be my next step. So that's the truth, I believe, of a situation like that in which you feel like you're not getting support. That's going to be an issue through, the thread of your entire relationship. And where else are you feeling unsupported and unacknowledged and not respected, essentially, right? So, sometimes we have this conversation about how can you, get people around you who are, maybe trying to sabotage your efforts, but honestly, like maybe that's not the problem. Maybe the problem is the relationship and the lack of respect and the internal issues of maybe being in a relationship where somebody is dominating you. And you don't feel like you have a voice, right? That's a whole other topic, right? So the root cause of that is not, the whole health thing and food thing is actually just a symptom of a deeper problem and of a deeper relationship issue. So that's what I would recommend is actually going for marriage counseling. Now, even though, to be honest with you, I never had this problem until our recent separation. My husband really allowed me to assume more control and responsibility around our kids' health, and he didn't try to sabotage it. Every once in a while, of course, he would take them to, Tim Hortons or whatever behind the scenes. For sure, that was definitely happening, but not the way he's right now, just bringing like croissants into the house from Costco and, white muffins, like those, what are they called? English muffins, things I would just never buy, right? Not the biggest deal on the planet, but, when you're eating that white bread every single day, that it adds up to missing out on the nutrition of like real whole grains, right? Before this point, maybe he obviously didn't share the values the same as I did, because as soon as he felt like he didn't have me to contend with, that he could do whatever he wanted, he just did something different. But I think in a healthy relationship where a man respects his wife, he will know that that's her job, not his, to make health decisions. That's a woman's domain. And I believe that if a man wants to make choices around that, including other choices like how a woman gives birth, all that kind of stuff, then he should have to do as much research as she is to even be in that conversation, considering that it's her body and her role as a mother to be the one to take responsibility for the child's health and well-being, because she feels it in her heart, right? And she has that instinctual mother's instinct to know what's best for her children. And I really think it's important that men respect that, and if they don't, that's a relationship issues. Can't even be solved in the context of this conversation, essentially, right? So I feel very strongly about that. So, get to the root cause of the issue. The food may not be the issue, the relationship maybe. All right, so I hope that has given you some ideas of how to let go where you don't have control, and where to implement and take control where you do have control. So just do an amazing job on, the parts that you do have control. Provide your kids with the best quality nutrition available to them so that they can, they know it's there. You're the one making the meals, so you have control there. Unless your partner's making the meals, then we have a whole other story. And that's sometimes is the case. And maybe that in that scenario, we have a woman that doesn't feel as connected to this role of being the person to nurture the family. And then maybe the man does have obviously more instinct around nourishment. Who knows? I've just never been in that experience before, because I've never really had even the experience of a man cooking for me, to be honest with you. I've done all of that, and not because I wanted to be the person to always have to do it, but that's another story. And I wanted to say one more thing. There was a study done of where children, they basically just put a bunch of different foods out, a plethora of foods, good and so-called unhealthy foods. And they thought, maybe the kids would just only binge on the junk food. And it turned out that when they had everything at their disposal, they didn't actually binge on just the junk food. They knew that eating the healthy food made them feel better. So they were actually quite attracted to eating the healthy food, and did, and it kind of all evened out. So kids do know what they need. And it just comes down to really trusting them to know when enough is enough for them, right? Because they are the ones who feel into their body. And remember back to when you were a kid and how you felt, that certain foods you ate did not make you feel good, and maybe you didn't know how to eat healthy, but at least you knew the impact, and you had the thought of eating healthy. I remember having that idea, even though I didn't really know how, the way I know how now, but I still had that awareness. So your kids are so lucky to have you, because when they do want to make healthy choices, they know where to go to get those healthy choices. They know who to ask, and they know that it's available if they want it. So there you go. I hope this has helped you to really just let go, and also, think about where you can make more effort in the areas that you do have control, so that you feel more relaxed about what they're doing when you're not the one making them the meals. And just let them have fun at grandma's or their dad's, and just make the culture in your own home around your own meals not just a physically nourishing experience on a nutrient level, but also on the feeling of happiness and connection around eating together. So looking at it from all aspects, the soul level as well, because of the nourishing impact that just simply eating together and, slowing down with the food and with each other, that is as much important as the specific foods that we're eating. And so, just maybe look at how you can add more of that into the experience. And that would be another way of taking control in the areas that you do have it. All right, so enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions, if there's anything I missed that might be helpful to you to answer specifically, feel free to post it below the video, and I'll do my best to help you out. All right, bye for now.